weather delays, persistent illnesses, overlapping appointments. It seems as if the very forces of nature are coming together to stop us from presenting the antithesis to the Grant Amato mindset and lifestyle, as if the earth itself wants our species to become a bunch of Grant Amatos, a bunch of flesh batteries, just to feed energy and information to the internet. And I do realize the apparent hypocrisy there, that here I am making a bunch of videos, hoping that time will be given to them by people on the internet. I'm not saying we should go live out in the woods and return to the Stone Age and just abandon all technology. I'm saying that we should cooperate with it and not become its slave, because clearly Grant Amato, with his downward spiral of a mindset that led to the crime, was becoming a slave to it, a slave to his urges that were being easily satisfied by it, a slave to his impulses. And the elements that led to him doing that are in all of us, and we have to recognize them before it's too late. I think if Grant Amato had a clear perspective of what he was planning to do from someone else's point of view, he would have just probably thrown up. But he didn't. He was trapped in his mindset. And here he is. Here he is in the interrogation, about to give one more attempt to sell his story before it's rejected. I know how that feels, Grant. You put your whole heart and soul into a story and then it just gets thrown back in your face. We don't want it. I do have some sympathy for that, Grant. But it's when Eva Marie Malteri presents Grant with the crime scene photos, because they're not getting anywhere with their, come on, Grant, tell us more than you're telling us. We know that you know more than you're admitting to. So Grant practically gets slapped across the face with these crime scene photos, because Malteri is just vicious. She's like, did you leave your father like this? How about Cody? What about your mother? She's sliding him across the table. And Grant, this is where he does some acting that I mentioned in the end of part 11 or 12 there. He's starting to act here because he pretends to cry. He's, oh, no, I didn't do this. And with no further information, just watching this in a vacuum, you might believe it. It's an okay attempt. Anderson himself on trial will say that he was faking crying. It wasn't showing in his eyes. There were no tears, no snot. And as we'll get to later on, he disproves his own crying with his future actions. And Anderson would also say that later on, when they leave him alone after they've rejected his story and just left him to wallow in his misery, to think about all the horrible decisions he's made, that will be legitimate crying, because he will be grabbing for the tissues, blowing his nose, and have actual tears in his eyes and in his voice. But not here, because there's still no curiosity or urgency to solve the crime. It's just, I didn't do this. Well, what's making you sad, Grant, with these fake tears? We'll get to that. So his acting has gotten him nowhere to selling the story. His story fell flat, and Grant's pretty much hitting the wall and getting ready to shut down and just encase himself in that film of slime. So the detectives try a new strategy here and leave him alone to regroup, reorganize. They have to hop over the trail of slime as they walk out of the room that Grant has left with his words. And they return a little while later and they give him the silent treatment, which is very effective on the average person, because they just come back in and they sit there and they don't say a word. They're looking through their notes. They're showing each other stuff on their phone, and they're not saying anything to Grant until he finally talks, and he does. And what he's saying is responding to the previous strategy that Malteri and Anderson employed during their whole rambling cop, direct cop routine, which worked fantastically. But the things that they were saying in that routine was alluding to the fact that they have more evidence than they're allowed to say to Grant. The neighbors have video recordings that reveal things, Grant, which may or may not be true, but it does betray Grant's innocence because he falls for it. If he was innocent and there was nothing to see and he had no lies to cover up, then the fact that the neighbors have video recordings is meaningless. It changes nothing about his true story. But since he's lying and guilty, he has to admit to one more thing. And he's thinking about, oh, if someone does have me on video, then I need to change my story. And what he does say finally, after a long silent treatment, is, all I can say is that I left later than I said I left. In case they caught him on video, leaving at a different time than he originally said. So that, worse than even before, it's undermining his story. Worse than admitting that he knew that there was a news report of a crime in his neighborhood. Worse than seeing a driveway and not being curious at all. The part about saying he left later undermines his story and his innocence. Because the very reasonable follow-up question from Malteri is, then why did you make up that story about meeting Cody on the roadside? Grant thinks about it, but there's not much to think. That's a pretty shallow pond of excuses, so he just says, I don't know. So, with that declaration, Grant Amato joins Chris Watts in the very small subgenre of people who would rather that others think that they were stupid because it's better than what they really are. Imagine that. Imagine sinking so low that you're hoping people say, oh, geez, I really hope they think I'm a dumbass, because that's better than what you really are. Public speaking is the number one fear of the average person because they're afraid of the public masses seeing them as an idiot, being exposed as a intellectual fraud, being seen as if they don't know what they're talking about. They're afraid of looking stupid in front of their village, their society, their tribe. They don't want to look stupid. That's why it's a greater fear than death. People are more scared of public speaking and being made to look stupid than they are of dying. There's that Seinfeld joke of, if you're at a funeral, you'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. And a greater fear than that, even, is one that most people never get to experience, which is being seen as a premeditated murderer of innocent people. If you get down to that subgenre, you would rather the public see you as a moron who has no idea what's going on than for what you really are. Imagine how embarrassing, humiliating, shameful that must feel. Worse than giving a public speech where you look like a complete idiot is where Grant is right now. So now we're starting to see why Grant makes himself pathetic and useless to let others change his diapers. His sense of responsibility has atrophied from doing this, from falling into this pattern of behavior. And now he's just worthless to take control of anything. And in his new story here, where he left at a different time and he's filling in more details about what happened for those extra hours where he was at home with his family and everyone was fighting and he was just trying to leave. He makes this up because none of it actually happened. His whole family was dead at the time he's saying this happened, but it is a window into his mindset and how pathetic he's willing to look to hide people from seeing what he really is. He's willing to look this bad so you don't know what he really is, a premeditated murderer of the innocent. Because getting into these details of what happened in these extra hours where he was really at home, now that they caught him in that lie, Grant says, well, they were all just yelling and I just walked away. And that's a perfectly acceptable way to behave to Grant in the mindset he's fallen into. That the problem he caused, this family argument, late into the hours of the night after everyone else has had long, stressful shifts at their various jobs, loser, lazy Grant has been laying around in a puddle of his own filth all day. And everyone, all of these responsible contributors to society that make up the rest of his family, are all arguing over the problems that Grant caused. And to make himself look like a wimpy dish rag who wouldn't do anything to solve his own problems, he says, they were all arguing about my problems and I just walked away because I'm a peaceful, nice guy. Aren't I such a nice, innocent guy? They were all arguing about the problems I caused and I just walked away. Instead of standing in and trying to do something about it, trying to solve the problem, he's trying to make himself look good by walking away from the problems he solved because it's better than what he really is. Ugh. So, to the average adult human, he actually looks like something that a doctor would find in a stool sample. And then we get to the proof that Grant's crying was fake. Because, like I said, they have all the crime scene photos out there in front of him on the table. His dead family, murdered, bloody, in the home he spent his childhood and grew up, and up until the recent weeks, had spent his entire life there. All of his memories take place in this home. And he's got all of his dead family members who did more for him than anyone else in the world murdered in front of him. And every time they ask a question or make a statement about something that they think he's not telling, they will point to the crime scene photos of his murdered family in his home. And Grant is looking at them like they're yearbook photos of people he's never met. He just glances at them without any emotion. And he answers their questions in a calm, unaffected voice. After he's just pretended to cry, he's right back to being unaffected by it. Was your dad wearing this when he left? Yeah. So it is natural to become numb to atrocities. Doctors and nurses have to do it. They deal with sickness, misery, death, dying every day, their full-time job. They have to become numb to that to survive. And there's that old story about the guy in a war-torn country. He comes to a dead kid, drops down onto his knees, and he's just screaming in anguish, "Oh my God, this is the worst thing ever." And eventually he has to get up, wipe his nose, and move on. Then he comes to 10 dead kids, and he slows down, looks at him, shakes his head, says, "It's a damn shame." Walks on. He comes to a pile of dead kid corpses. Doesn't even stop to look at them. He doesn't even care anymore. Because he has to survive. He has to move on and survive. He doesn't have any gas left in that tank. He has to worry about his next meal. He has to worry about relieving himself. He has to worry about finding shelter for the night. So you could collapse into wallowing grief and anguish and die, or you can move on and survive, which is what people in very stressful jobs where they have to deal with these regular atrocities on a regular basis have to do. But Grant, in this scenario, is unusually numb. And the reason for that is because he has spent hours with these murdered corpses, cleaning up the evidence, making the crime scene fit the anime he's going to portray later on when he's questioned. So then he ends up saying how my brother, like he's trying to explain this to the detectives about you're not showing any emotion to this. He's been, like I just described, in front of the crime scene photos and not affected by it, even though he just pretended to cry earlier. And he's already over it and normal again, just trying to answer their questions. So Grant will say, like, my brother even said while all this was happening, why aren't you sad about this? Why can't you show a sadness about this? And I just don't know. And I know the answer to that, Grant. If you really are wondering, this has been the easiest question to answer in the entire case. As unfathomable as some of these questions have been to answer, and all the details I've had to go through connecting the dots to figure out how a mindset could get to thinking this is something worth doing with their precious seconds on God's earth, this question was the easiest to answer. Why weren't you sad about it? You weren't sad at all about this because you didn't care. You didn't care about the problems that you caused for your family. You didn't care about because you didn't have to solve them yourself. It wasn't your problem. You had fallen into a pattern of behavior where everyone else takes care of your problems for you. So you didn't need to care. You weren't feeling the consequences that your family was feeling for you. And that's why you couldn't feel a sadness about that. Your ability to feel the sadness had atrophied with your desire to take the easy way out, to take the shortcuts and let everyone else do it for you. You cared about as much as Sylvie cares to visit you in prison. So you've made your family miserable, and now you're destroying their memories with your version of them, the way you're trying to portray them to make you look innocent. But thankfully, your last surviving brother, Jason, is about to come and save the day. He's going to save the whole Amato family. And he's coming in next. So we'll get to that in what's probably going to be the 14th and final part to this series. So I'll see you next time.